The Chicago Bears have new people in charge, and it took just a few hours after Ryan Poles was named the new general manager of the Chicago Bears. The new head coach has been named. It is Matt Eberflus. That's going to be fun for Chicago to say over and over again to learn. We are here on the Sports Cubicle. It is Devin Tingle, Paul Chivari, the one and only, the marvelous one, Dan Marver, and myself, Mike Mercado, trying to make sense, understand, and look into the future of the Chicago Bears and these hires. And I think to start this conversation, we need to go to the one, the only, the man who drives this train, Devin Tingle, who was ready to fire everyone, and it finally happened. Now that we have a new Matt and Ryan in charge, what were your initial thoughts of the Chicago Bears and their new head coach and general manager?
Well, I'm not wearing my fire everyone t-shirts. They must have done something right here. And I mean, they kind of flipped the roles in the Matt and the Ryan here, definitely like you were saying. It's definitely something interesting here. I mean, our last two head coaches that were offensive coordinators were Matt Nagy and Mark Tresman. And look how well that turned out. So I think going back to a defensive coordinator, that might be the rate the Bears need to go. Because the thing about the NFC North, I mean, we don't know next year, depending where Aaron Rodgers will go. It's a very offensive-heavy sort of division. And that's never been the Bears. Lovie Smith was a great defensive coach, but they got rid of him because he was not going to work in the NFC North. So I think going back to, like, the roots, so to speak, definitely could be the good way to kind of get these Bears back on track here. Because the Bears, their defense has gotten a lot better, and their offense has always been a struggle here. So even if we can't, make Justin Fields the next MVP that he's going to be, I definitely think if we have a good defense and we get Justin Fields to like a solid, B- quarterback, we could definitely be playoff contenders in the future.
Marvelous one, we know that you are having a very busy day today, but because of this breaking news as of this recording here on the Sports Cubicle, you wanted to jump in and talk about the Chicago Bears, the new people in charge in Ryan Poles, Brian Poles, and Matt Eberflus. Your thoughts on the breaking news Chicago has a new GM and head coach?
Well, it's good that they have a defensive coordinator. I was saying all along, defense was their strength. I don't know how this actually helps Fields, but I'll be anxious to see who the offensive coordinator is. That might be the key to the whole thing. And, if you look at his career, he was at Toledo, which, because I'm a Mac guy, that probably paints my vision right there. But he actually, one of those coaches was a fellow named Nick Saban. Can you believe it? He was at Toledo originally, years and years ago. And so that's some good bloodlines. But, he's never been a head coach, much like his predecessor. So that worries me. It's a lot different when you have the big board and you're in charge of everything instead of just one aspect of the team. But, I mean, it seems like a decent hire. We'll have to see. I mean, I'd like to see what's going to happen with the offense more than the defense. I'm not worried about it. So we'll go from there. So that's my initial reaction. And the GM is a good choice. It looks like a good choice.
Paulie Dangerous, you see Ryan Poles comes from your team's nemesis in Kansas City, somebody who survived a bunch of different regimes, known for his scouting, gets the big man job at Halas Hall. And then the new head coach coming from Indianapolis. You are someone who has been doing a little digging since this news is broke. Your own team is in its own process in the Las Vegas Raiders of possibly finding a new head coach. Your thoughts, though, here locally in Chicago, the Monsters of the Midway, trying to get back to that status and hoping that this hire is that. Your thoughts on the new GM and head coach?
Well, I don't know much about Ryan Poles. Just, it kind of scares me that he's so young. He's 36 years old. He comes from the Kansas City Chiefs. We've seen the last two times the Bears have plucked from the Kansas City Chiefs and Matt Nagy and Phil Emery, and it didn't really work out as well. But he worked under Scott Pioli, who's renowned as one of the better GMs or at least personnel people in the league. The Chiefs are a well-run organization. You could see their success right now. They were building towards this. I think even if they didn't have Patrick Mahomes, they still would be a pretty solid team as long as they had a reasonable quarterback. But this guy has a background coming from Boston College and immediately jumping into being a grad assistant with them years ago, that, he has the capability of recruiting and scouting talent, even though the pros are different than college. But at the very least, Ryan Pace wasn't touted as much as Poles was to be, kind of the boy wonder and be the next, the next talked about GM or next possibility for GM. Pace kind of came out of nowhere. I know they were talking about how his strength in scouting, but I don't think people were really scouting him to be a GM, where it seems like Poles was on a few lists and comes from a better pedigree, I think, than Poles does. So I'm going to give him a chance, just like I gave Ryan Pace a chance, and unfortunately, Poles doesn't have a first round draft pick to botch in his first season, so maybe that buys him a little bit of time. But as far as Eberflus, well, one, I'm calling it now that Chicago Bears fans are going to change it to, like they did with Josh McCown to McGowan, they're going to change Eberflus to Eberflus. I'm just going to call it now. But as far as Eberflus, I think like Poles, he comes with a great pedigree. He turned around the Indianapolis Colts defense when he got there. He wasn't even he was the original pick to go with Josh McDaniels before McDaniels pulled the offer and went back to New England. And Frank Reich had to be convinced to keep Eberflus on his staff, and it really worked out for him. As far as Eberflus and his head coaching or lack thereof, though, he was an assistant head coach, whatever that title officially means, from organization or school to school. But the important part, and Mike, you and I talked about this off the air about how nowadays you don't really need an X's and O's guy to be your head coach. You just need a big picture organizer. And of course, like Marvelous was saying, how defense has always been the Bears' strengths. You get a guy that can play to the strengths, keep the defense in check. There should not be any worry about the Bears' defense going forward. And now, as soon as they get a good offensive coordinator to run a system, now it's just up to Eberflus to just make sure everything's working in order and all three phases of the game are being tended to.
And you bring up some really good points. All three of you are hitting on things I think a lot of Chicago is talking about. A lot of the NFL community is talking about as Ryan Poles, the new GM of your Chicago Bears, and Matt Eberflus is the new head coach of the Chicago Bears. Some things I kind of want to tackle. And then while we have Marver, I want to throw it to him. But some things initially is this is a defensive guy coming in. Going to be interested to see. He comes from the Tony Dungy tree, so perhaps the idea of the 4-3, the Tampa 2, the Lovey 2, how is that going to play with this roster of players? And for Ryan Poles, I want to know how much power he actually had. Was this the choice he wanted? Was he forced on this? Did the McCaskies, did Ted Phillips say, yeah, you can have the choice, but these are the choices you have? And to me, that is a lot of the problem of the Bears is how much hand-holding are you going to do? He may be 36, but he has the keys to the car now. So let him make this decision. I know what they're going to tell us, but if we can have the truth serum, I want to know who was on his list, who was on that little black book of his that he wanted to court into Chicago, and where did it end up falling? Why is it that Dan Quinn was pulled out? Did he not want this job? Is he promised something in Dallas? Why is Brian Flores not in consideration? What happened to any conversations with Jim Harbaugh? Why was all this decided before Ryan Poles got his job? These are conversations I think need to be had and we'll never really know the answers to. The next thing, though, on the actual hires, we have a guy that knows defense, has a pedigree. We've seen with Mike Vrabel over in Tennessee that a defensive-minded person can have complete control of a team and can make their image on something that he believes in. And you saw it with Tennessee. They lose Derrick Henry, maybe the best running back in the league, and yet they find a way to stay afloat up until the playoffs because they were coached properly. They have the right roster, and they go to what their coach's strength is and the chemistry and the culture that he's built on that roster. What is Matt Eberflus going to do? It's going to be a while for us to learn that one. And you said it, leader of men. So if you're going to be the CEO, that means you have to have an offensive coordinator who's going to do the right thing. And are you going to lose that offensive coordinator? Because if you fix Justin Fields, and I use that word fix because the Bears have never had a good offense, you're going to have any job in the NFL. So Marver, I'm going to throw it to you. We have a few minutes. We're going to be breaking this down over the next few weeks. The Bears have a new head coach, a new GM. You're more optimistic. You have more pessimistic about this hire. Where are you on the Chicago Bears moving forward?
Well, Ted Phillips is still there, and so they get Caskey. So as far as that's concerned, that hasn't changed any. So they will still have plenty of input. And Ted Phillips, those folks are not football people at all. So hopefully the new GM will be able to use his football knowledge to do good things without being interfered with. That's my only concern. Still the politics there are such that it still concerns me, but he seems like a very qualified GM and the coaching pedigree is fine for our new coach. But, it's like everything else. Let's wait and see. I mean, that's what I told my son. He's looking for another job. He said, "Well, I like it better." He said, "You won't know till you're there." And that's the way I feel about this. You won't know till the season starts, and you see what actually they do. What moves they make in the off season, and what team they put on the field, and what schemes they use. And again, more worried about the offense than the defense.
And we will find out if and who the offensive coordinator is going to be. Devin, are you more excited, less excited? Where are you now that you know who's in charge of your Chicago Bears?
I mean, it's pretty hard to be less excited than I was in 2021 and 2022. Definitely a scene going forward here. But to go back to your question, actually, Jim Harbaugh was on the list, but Michigan did not want him to leave, so they gave him control over a lot of things. I know Brian Flores had an interview, but you do make valid points here. But like, Marver said, it's like there's still some people that need to go. And remember, we have George McCaskey, but he's a fan just like us guys. So, we really can't hold his feet to the fire. He should just host a show like we do in that case. But definitely we got to see what's going to be the case here. I mean, he's kind of, he's coming in, Poles is coming in here. It's kind of like you gave him a car and it's like the car runs, but the transmission's probably shot. The engine needs some work. And you're probably going to need 4 new tires by the end of next week. So, again, we need to just kind of wait and see here. It's like he's kind of given the keys to that car you're talking about, but this is my Toyota Corolla right now. It's like you need a lot of work getting this thing to and from.
Paulie Dangerous, last minute is to you a outside perspective. Should Bears fans be excited? Should they have something to look forward to? Is there a light at the end of the tunnel? Is it too early to tell? Your thoughts on where Bears fans' mindset should be after these 2 hires?
Well, I would tell Bears fans to temper their expectations. I mean, you have essentially a team that's not rebuilding, but has almost a tougher challenge than rebuilding because they're more than just a few players away and they don't have that first-round draft pick to work with. And they're kind of stuck with a couple of contracts. They have a decent core they can build around. We'll see what the philosophies are of Ryan Poles and, Matt Eberflus. But I think at the same time, these are 2 guys that don't have experience rehabbing a team from scratch. So the odds are stacked against them. This is a tough market to be in. Sure, Bears fans can be excited because it's different. It's something different. But I remember when Bears fans were excited about Matt Nagy, and I don't remember why they would be. So I'll give it time. I'm really rooting for these gentlemen to get the job done here. And I think they both have very impressive pedigrees compared to some of the most recent people in those positions in Bears history. So I'm hoping for the best, but honestly, I don't see this thing really clicking in motion until 2023 at the earliest, maybe 2024.
Absolutely. And I think it's going to come down to, again, to see if there's any maturity in the offense, to see who they bring in to run the offense, and if there's an evolution in Justin Fields. And, of course, we're going to be covering all that. And, of course, everything in the NFL. We are so close to the Super Bowl, so you better stay tuned to the Sports Cubicle. The Bears have a new GM. The Bears have a new head coach, and football, as always, is king. It's Devin Tingle. It's Paul Chivari. It's the marvelous one, Dan Marver. I'm Mike Mercado.